Right. So that's very important that that there was this disagreement amongst the Anunnaki themselves over the humans that were created and how they would be used and exploited. And obviously, this is something that we can talk about a little bit later when it comes to their return. But right now, as far as the Anunnaki themselves are and their genetics, I mean, you talk about them as being hybrids themselves of the Nebu and of Sirius B humans. So can you describe that?
Yes, there was, it was way before the Nebu rose as a power in the Orion zone. It was way before there were races of greys, tall greys there already, Betelgeuse, Rigel, and all this Mintaka. And there was a conflict with Sirius B, who were humans, populated by humans. Sirius B star system is extremely populated. There are many civilizations in there. It's a hub for life, technology. A lot of things are happening in Sirius B system. So there was a conflict, and to resolve the conflict, there was a hybridization to create a new race, and who were the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki have more human DNA than gray. So they consider themselves human. And they call themselves Syrians as well, from Sirius B, Tashkeru also. Yes, are hybrids. They consider themselves by proud of the human. They prefer to consider themselves as humans than greys. So they say they are from Sirius B.
So can you tell us about the Sumerian kings list and how important is that in terms of understanding the involvement of the Anunnaki in the creation of humans and subsequent ruling bloodline families?
So that is a very interesting fact and artifact, because we found that on clay tablets there is a corroboration with in ancient Egypt with the Zep-Tepi period, which is also written down. What is that about? When two civilizations tell the same thing, there's something to fall is a track there that you cannot dismiss. What is that about? Both say that in immemorial times in the past, there were gods coming to Earth, and that these gods rule over Earth, but dates are given, and the rulership is like sometimes 1,000 years rulership. That's not human, and we know that the Anunnaki live very long. Well, I know. The Sumerian king list details the rulership of gods. They give names everywhere they ruled, changes of places with thousands and hundreds of years of reign, and suddenly there's a change. They hybridize themselves with humans, and then there are hybrid kings. There's a list of hybrid kings, and then you see the length of the reigns a little bit shorter, and then one day the gods leave the planet and leave the custody of the planet to totally human kings with normal length of reigns and life. So that is really telling, and dates are given, and when these dates correspond to the dates given by the ancient Egyptian records, that is amazing.
It is, and those ancient records are very important for us understanding a little bit about the culture and the dynamics of the Anunnaki and some of the other groups. Because we don't know too much about the Cedars, but we know a lot about the Anunnaki because the Sumerians talked about them. And I mean, we don't know too much about Atlantis other than Plato talking a little bit about it historically. So the Sumerian records and the Egyptian records. Now, the Egyptian gods, are we talking the same? Are we talking about a similar group to the Anunnaki, or are we talking about something else altogether?
So that was really a clarification for me, because that was very blurry and messy. The ancient Egyptian culture was an offshoot from the Anunnaki. It was an Anunnaki colony, and they started to rule themselves upon this area of the world, and then exactly what is written in the Sumerian king list, it's written in the Zeptepi king list, Zeptepi list in Egypt. They ruled over the land. Then they put hybrids in power, and then it cut, and it was only human kings, exactly the same. So the Egyptian gods, there's something very interesting. The pyramid of Unas, 3100 something BC, pyramid of Unas in Saqqara, so that predates the pyramids of Giza. In this pyramid, there are texts written, or carved and painted inside of the pyramid, and it's called the text of the pyramids, and it depicts a star religion. It's the first time, the oldest text we have that depicts the gods and the Ennead. The Ennead is 9 ruling gods. So that's when it becomes interesting for 2 aspects. The number 9 in Egyptian counting and spirit, 9 means multitude. Okay, so it can represent a multitude of gods, but that wouldn't, fit totally with it. It wouldn't make sense. What makes sense is that the number 9 is also the number for the 9, these supra-consciousnesses who are in the void, at the root, at the singularity of all universes, all dimensions, to whom the Intergalactic Confederation and the Cedars relate as a higher guidance. So the Anunnaki, they were a very advanced civilization, and at a stage in the development, you become aware of where you stand in a universe and how the universe is structured, and you are aware of source as an origin of consciousness and life energy, and also you become aware of the 9 principle of the universe, these mysterious supra-consciousnesses. So of course the Anunnaki knew about the 9. So they brought also with them this awareness. There's a confusion, between this awareness of the 9 and the Anunnaki being remembered as gods. So 9 gods. There were more of them, but the number 9, it's divine for the ancient Egyptian, represents the gods, the 9. The Anunnaki left a heritage of this spirituality. 3,000 years, you have the time to get confused because you pass on from generation to generation. History becomes myth becomes religions, and it just becomes really weird. The ancient Egyptian gods at the start were Anunnaki custodians. And through the story of Seth and Osiris, you find the struggle between Enlil and Enki for the inheritance of the land and for the bloodline that will give the bloodline of the kings. And the bloodline of the kings came from Osiris, Uzir. Wazir means the powerful, the Lord. And this really, really, really reminds us of Enki as fathering a royal bloodline. But it doesn't mean that Enki was Osiris. No, there are many different gods that can represent the same aspect or ancient ET, you know, it's very complex. But just to say that the struggle between Osiris and Seth was an ancient reminiscence of the custodian war between Enki and Enlil.
Yes, that is very interesting. And, you know, we have other cultures also having similar battles between brothers, you know, like, of course, we have Thor and well, I've forgotten his name, but how can I forget his name? But Thor's opposite in the in the Norse mythology.
Loki was the tricky one. And what's interesting with Loki in the Norse mythology, Loki plays God. Loki plays roles, and Loki is the opposite of Thor. Thor, when you look at the meaning of it, means the chief of armies, or the one in command. But it's more of a title of, it's not really military. It's like Lord would mean Lord, or, you know, the noble one who is at the head. And so yes, Loki played a lot games, and we find in the inheritance of the Anunnaki story, which is in the Hebraic tradition, there's a god that plays, there's a custodian ET that plays God, and that is very tricky, and that always likes to turn humans one against the other, and always try to make them fight and play tricks on them and order slaughters. Loki was doing that, but in the Hebraic tradition, it was Enlil. And so everything, you know, we need to look at these things with a global vision, planetary vision, and follow all the myths together. And then we understand, having a broader perspective. You know, you cannot take one culture's mythology and say, that's it. No, you'll have to look all over the world and see the correspondence. And then you can find who was who, you know?
Yeah, very interesting. These parallels, these myths of our brothers, half brothers fighting against each other, and they being part of the kind of like creator gods. I mean, also you have Zeus and Poseidon, and so it kind of repeats from culture to culture. Well, yes. One of the things that I find very perplexing, and maybe you can clarify, is exactly what role did the Anunnaki play in Atlantis? On the one hand, the Alteans were the seeders or founders, or connected to the founding of Atlantis, but at the same time, the Anunnaki were involved with Atlantis. So yeah, can you describe what the Anunnaki involvement with Atlantis was?
Yes, the Anunnaki were there before the Altean colony came back to found the civilization of Atlantis that they called Atla. Before that, this continent was already taken by the Anunnaki, you know, and Enki had set his residence there for a while. And that's why Enki is linked to Poseidon and is the waters, but it's also something else with the waters and Enki. The waters represent the genetics, the genesis is the water of creation, the liquids. Anyway, then there was this war. Enki wasn't linked to Atlantis anymore, and the Alteans came. They took the land. They were there. Enki and his faction lost the war against Enlil. You know, Enki is not a military chief. He's he loves life. He's a lover of life. He's a poet. He's a scientist, you know. So he's not good at fighting. So he left. But Enlil stayed longer on Earth, left a descendants and a faction that is still here today. And these people, the people of Enlil, had a part to play in the fall of Atlantis. You know, they allied with reptilians who arrived also at the same time in these times. And they worked together because they had the same mind, which is to collapse a society from the inside, to infiltrate it, to hybridize with the ruler class. And then once you're in, you collapse it by internal wars. That's what happened. So that was the involvement of the Anunnaki in Atlantis, that I know.
Edgar Cayce talked about the sons of Belial infiltrating and taking over Atlantis and bringing about its destruction. So by the sons of Belial, we're talking about this Enlil faction that really just undermined Atlantean civilization out of jealousy, out of spite, because this was an Altean colony that had taken over what was earlier Anunnaki territory.
Yes, the Alteans were not easily corruptible, you know, but because they had quite a strong mind and they were very advanced in consciousness, very quickly what happened when the infiltration started, because, you know, Atlantis was growing in power, and this power, everybody else wanted it. So everyone wants to be part of Atlantis. Also, the colonies, you know, was very strict, and because the Alteans have a technology that is quite powerful and used at wrong ends can be extremely destructive. But when you have this technology, you have the ultimate power, and they all wanted it. So Atlantis was coveted by all, you know, these Anunnakis and reptilians also were there. They infiltrated, yes, and they worked on the colonies. What happened is that there's a shift that happened between the Altean class of scientists and the colonies, and they were really crack. And when it started to smell bad, because the colonies wanted the power, they wanted to have access to the generators and the crystal technology and everything, so it started to smell bad. So the Alteans decided to go and preserve this knowledge out of Atlantis throughout the world.
That is fascinating, because again, in Atlantis, we have this theme of where you have one faction comprising scientists that are more humane and wanting to preserve the culture, whereas on the other hand, you have this power faction that is there to try and control everyone and suppress. And there was a split in Atlantean society, and that seems to have been the same in Anunnaki society. And so it does make me think that maybe the you know, some of those have been of this Enki faction, whatever part of it remained, if any of it remained, after Enki had to leave.
Yes, for sure, you know, Enki wasn't on his own. He had his people with him, you know, so these people certainly stayed in Atlantis, yes. But the Alteans were in control, but there were Anunnaki there as well, working and being with the Alteans.